I recently sold my red Monstro, and that puts me in the market for a new cinema camera. I'm a DP that works primarily in the commercial space, and so I've narrowed it down to 4 different bodies that I think might work for me. I wanted to make a video of a behind the scenes look of kind of my thought process and what I'm thinking through and weighing the pros and cons of these different systems. There's no camera that checks absolutely every box, but if I could build an ideal camera, here's what I would have. I would have compressed RAW, open gate recording, internal ND, the ability to have autofocus if I need it, reliability, a short flange distance, and sub 30K. The reason I want short flange distance is because there's a lot of new lenses that are coming out that look really fun, and they're all made for the newer flange distances, so I just want the ability to try them if I want to. Okay, first up is the Sony Burano. So I've used their ecosystem for years. I got the Sony FX6 and the FX3 like right when they came out, so I'm very familiar with the sensors and the color science. Now this one makes the list because it checks a lot of the boxes. It doesn't check all of them, but it checks most of them. It's got a very familiar color science, and it's a color science that's widely accepted in the industry. Everybody's shooting on the Venice 2, and this is basically the baby brother to that. So I think it'd be really good for commercial work, doc work, and in fact I've used it on quite a few projects. It's got internal RAW recording, and the RAW recording is really good. It's like their LT version, but I've graded a lot of stuff with it, and it holds up. You can do 8.6K, you can do 6K, and when you do a 6K, it technically has a little bit of a crop, but maybe it's like 5%. So it's really, I wouldn't really consider that a crop on that. It's got really good autofocus. It's got the same autofocus that we're seeing in the FX3, the FX9, the FX6. It's got really good battery life compared to what I was seeing on my Monstro. My Monstro would chew through batteries, and whenever I rented the Ursa Cine, it would chew through batteries. You're talking 30 minutes, but this one you can run for a couple hours, on a good sized battery. The other thing that I really like about this camera is that Sony supports their systems for a long time. When they release a body, they're seeming to stick with them for a long time. The FX3 is still getting good updates. The FX6 is still getting good updates. The Burano, it's only a year old, so I feel like it's a safe time to get into that system. They stuck with the Venice for a long time. They're now onto the Venice 2, but the Venice 1 is still widely accepted and still being used. And then one more thing that's very good about this camera system is that it's trusted in the industry. So if you show up with this, it's automatically trusted. You don't have to convince a production company to bite on it or try to use it. Everybody understands Sony color science to a degree. At least they've seen it before if they're in production. So if you say, hey, I want to shoot this on the Burano, or we're going to shoot this on the Burano, that's great. And then lastly, I don't rent a lot, but there is a rentability aspect to this. Because so many people are shooting on the Sony systems, this would be a great B camera for a Venice on a film or a TV show, or maybe an A camera on some other shows. So I like that. So to the downsides of the Burano. The Burano does have quite a slow sensor readout, especially if you're doing it at 8.6K. Now the 2.0 addresses that. They included some new sensor readout speeds and then some new crop modes, etc., that kind of speed it up. So that's good. Whenever you fully rig this camera out with media and everything, you are gonna top out that target budget of 30K. So once you add your cage and your media and batteries, etc., you're gonna hit that 30K pretty quick because the camera itself is like 25 right now. But overall, Sony has really caught my attention because they're developing a family of cameras that work and play really nice together. They've got their S-Log dialed in, and they're putting that codec on everything from the FX3 all the way up to the Venice 2. And so the Burano is a nice kind of middleweight right there. I don't necessarily want to invest $60,000 into a Venice 2 system. I don't really know that in the market that I work in, I would ever see that ROI. So sitting right here around 30K for this kit brand new seems like a pretty good option. The only thing that holds me back is that it has no open gate, which I think would be fun, especially whenever we're doing a bunch of these vertical and horizontal deliverables, and then the rolling shutter. But, honestly, I've used the Burano several times on different sets, and I don't know how often I'm actually ever going to see that rolling shutter. I'm not doing a bunch of whips, and I'm not shooting out of a window, you know, going to see the telephone poles or anything like that. So it's an issue, but I feel like it's an issue that's kind of been blown out of proportion. That the sensor readout has been a thing with cameras like since the dawn of the electric sensor. So it's not something that really hangs me up all that much. So in summary, for the Sony Burano, kind of on my checklist, it checks a lot of the boxes and it fits into my ecosystem really well. It doesn't have open gate, and it's got a slower sensor readout speed than I would like to have in general, but you know, overall it's a good option. The next option on my list is the Red Raptor X with the Z mount, the new Nikon version essentially. With Red, I'm very familiar with their user interface and their ecosystem. I've been a Red user for years, I think since 2018 or so, and shot on a whole bunch of different bodies of theirs. I've had very good luck with their customer service and their repair teams. I really like the Red Code RAW that comes out of these. You've got a bunch of different options of true compressed RAW with no internal noise reduction or anything like that. R3D is very fast, it's reliable, it's a standard in the industry, so you're not getting into anything weird with those. I've had some issues with B-RAW with one of the agencies that I shoot for. They had an issue with B-RAW going into Avid or something like that, and so there's always risk whenever new RAW codecs are introduced. I really like the Z mount on the new Reds because you're able to adapt to literally any mount that's out there. So the Z mount, I think right now, is the shortest flange distance of any of the new shorter flange distances. So you can adapt Z to E, L, PL, obviously, EF, literally anything. So I love that aspect of it. It's got a small body, so these new Reds are a lot lighter weight than the previous generations. They're a lot smaller, they're a lot more power efficient, which I like that. They've moved to new standard media, so you don't have to be locked into the Red ecosystem, so you can get into that a little bit more economically, which is great. They've got really good battery life compared to what I was seeing on my Monstro. I shot on a DSM-C3 and the battery life was phenomenal. I mean, it was, I wouldn't say it was as good as an FX6, but it was surprisingly good. So that was something that attracts me to this system. So for some cons, first of all is the cost. So for the V Raptor X and the Z mount, for just the brain only, you're looking at $30,000 essentially. And if you wanted to get the starter pack, you're looking at $34,000, give or take. The starter pack is probably something that you would want to do because that includes media, a screen, a reader, and then includes a couple batteries and a side handle, but they're basically just throwing those in, it seems like. So really for me, I would be a little bit over budget. It would be $35,000 versus the 30 target. But what I do like about the system is that it's industry standard. It's reliable for the most part. I mean, I always had good luck on my Red systems. They're introducing autofocus, which who knows how good it'll be on the first round, but I assume it's probably Nikon's system integrated in, so probably pretty good. And then another con is historically Reds just do not hold their value. I think the Red Monstro that I bought it used, but originally that kit was like $95,000 and I got it for much less than that, and then whenever I sold it, it was right around 10 or something like that. So you're talking about a massive dip, so you really have to make your money back fast on these Reds. And then the last con for this Red Raptor X is obviously no internal ND. You could go to the XL, but then you're getting into a different price category, and it's just going to be a little bit out of what I would want to spend. So this camera has a lot of the features that I want, but doesn't have a 3x2 sensor and does not have internal ND. And then you cannot shoot the full sensor without shooting 8K, which every once in a while is a bummer whenever I'm just handing off footage and the client doesn't want 8K footage. The third camera would be the Blackmagic Pyxis 12K. I actually got to get hands on this camera whenever I was at NAB, and honestly, it's a surprisingly good camera. It feels pretty good. I hadn't got to have my hands on a Pyxis yet, but I really liked the form factor and the size, and I felt like I could use this on a set. My favorite thing about this camera is the 12K sensor. That's the thing that attracts me to this in general. I wasn't really interested in the Pyxis with the 6K sensor, but this 12K sensor I think is genuinely pretty special. The way Blackmagic designed this sensor to work with B-RAW and handshake natively with DaVinci Resolve is it feels seamless. I got to shoot with this sensor on the Ursa Cine on a project a few months ago, and honestly, I think that this is probably the best sensor that Blackmagic has ever put in a camera. It's got beautiful color, it's got beautiful highlight retention, and the claims of it having these insane dynamic range stops, I think are totally valid, at least from what I was seeing. It doesn't seem to be manufactured, fake numbers that we see, or some like very, very ideal numbers that we see from other manufacturers. And what's really special about this sensor is being able to shoot open gate, but then you can shoot it in 12K, you can shoot it in 8K, and you can shoot it in 4K. So some cons about this camera, I think the saying goes something, if you want to buy a Blackmagic camera, just wait 8 months because it'll be on a 50% mark off or whatever it is. So I think like the industry kind of looks at Blackmagic and says, yeah, sometimes they make some pretty good stuff, but they're going to cannibalize their own market within the next 8 to 12 months. And so the rate at which they're adapting and innovative is attractive in one way, but it's also hard to just go in on it. But that's a caveat, because depending on where you're at, this camera is also like $5,000, which is a significant price decrease from some of the other packages that we're looking at. Another con for the Blackmagic would probably be reliability. I had a Blackmagic Pocket 4K years ago, and it was very reliable, but recently I've heard some mixed reviews in terms of build quality and reliability from different DPs that I've talked to, and then my own personal experience. So I rented the Ursa Cine 12K, and on that set, it crashed once while we were rolling on a clip, which, busted the shot. Obviously, we had to retake it, which is not something that I want to do often or make a habit of. And then it crashed twice whenever we were just on rest, and the camera would just basically freeze, and then there would be these lines coming over the screen, and then I would turn the camera off with the power switch, nothing would happen, and I would end up having to pull power, and so that kind of concerns me getting into this system. Being a camera that I would use on some of the larger productions, I'm not sure if I could trust the Blackmagic system, but it would be a fun camera just to have around, just so you could get that 12K open gate and that color science. So in summary, I think the Blackmagic could be a really good option, and it's definitely the most economical option. It shoots on standard media, you have a beautiful sensor with beautiful color science, but it doesn't have internal ND. It doesn't necessarily have the reputation, and then I am a little bit concerned about the reliability. And then the last camera on the list is the Kinefinity Mavo Edge, which is a really interesting one, and it checks most of the boxes, but it's got a few cons as well, but we'll get there. So let's start with the pros. So the pros is I've owned a Mavo LF, and I'm really happy with the color that came out of that camera. In fact, the camera was really reliable. I never really had any freezing issues, but the codecs and the color science in that camera is very, very similar to the Alexa. In fact, I think a lot of the times I just used an Alexa Rec 709 conversion LUT, and it was almost perfect. I just pulled some magentas out of it. Now, Kinefinity's body design on this camera is probably one of the better body designs that I've seen. So they've got their own proprietary mounts, but basically you can go anything that's E and up. So I think if I was going to get into this system, I would get the E mount, I would get the PL mount, and probably call it a day, because that's probably where I would live with most of the lenses that I have and the lenses that I would be interested in. On the back side, it's got some cool design. It's got a lot of different I/O options. It's got a V mount as well as an MPF battery option, which is really cool. Another pro is price to performance. I mean, for what you're getting for the price, you're getting a really strong image. So even if you get their Pro Pack, is what they call it, which is basically just the spec'd out version of the camera with all of the accessories and media and screen, etc., you're still coming in at sub 19K. So you're getting a lot of image for the price. So con-wise, this is where it gets a little different, because although the build quality was really good on my Mavo LF, they're all electronics, and eventually electronics will fail. From what I've heard, the support in the US has historically not been good. Every once in a while it'll be really good, and then every once in a while it'll basically not exist, and you have to ship it to China to get it repaired. And that's a pretty big hurdle to come over. Just because of the off chance that the camera goes down, you've all of a sudden got a $20,000 paperweight that you either have to ship across the world to get repaired, or you cross your fingers and hope that all the repairs work out and you're able to get it repaired in the United States. Another con is, although the color science is really good, you have to really pay attention to the way that the camera works. So the camera has this feature called highlight stops or something like that, where you can kind of shift your dynamic range up and down. And so depending on the scene, you want to change that. So if you don't do it right, sometimes you can have issues with like clipped highlights and stuff like that. So it's just one more thing to kind of keep in mind whenever you're working on these cameras. It's just another step to be on top of. And then similar, but probably worse than the Blackmagic, is just industry reputation. Kinefinity, I think, makes a fairly, quality product, but it's another hurdle to overcome. In fact, that's something that I struggled with a Mavo LF. Was sometimes I would have to convince people to shoot on it because, I had seen it looks really good. I've shot these projects on it, etc. I think that would be another conversation that you would have again if you had the Mavo Edge, is just convincing people that the camera was up to snuff, basically. And then lastly on cons, and maybe it's a benefit, but it's such a boutique brand that this camera would never rent out. So you wouldn't ever rent it out additionally if you were not working it, which is something to keep in mind. A lot of the times I don't rent my stuff out anyways because I'm very particular about how clean and taking care of my gear is, but it's just one more thing. So in summary, the Kinefinity I think is a really good option. It checks a lot of the boxes. It does not have autofocus, but it checks most of the other boxes. But then the biggest downside would just be kind of reputation, potential reliability. So overall, each camera is going to solve the same problem for me, but they're all doing it a little bit different. There's not a camera that checks every single box. And so I've been having this debate with myself for 2 months now since I sold the Monstro. And I'm kind of coming to a point where I think I'm narrowing it down even further, but I think it's cool that we live in a time that there's so many good cameras that are coming out that I am having to debate this long. In the past, I would just find a camera and pop on it because I knew that it fit my need, but now there's so many different cameras that technically fit the need that I really need to take a long study on them and see what's the best case and what's the best thing for me and my business at this point. I think as I continue to narrow down my list of cameras, my internal conversation will shift less from specs and more into workflow, support, resale, and trust in the brand. If there's a camera that I didn't have on this list that you think should have made it, or you want to say something about what I said or a camera that I mentioned, I'd love to hear it and drop it in the comments. We can have a conversation about it. I'm sharing my journey and what I've learned along the way. If you want to continue growing together, consider subscribing. This is just the beginning of the conversation.